Now, top story tonight, Grace Mugabe, the controversial First Lady of Zimbabwe, was in the media the whole of last week after she allegedly assaulted a South African model, Gabriella Angles, using an extension cord while her bodyguards allegedly looked on. Now, this was after she allegedly found Gabriella with one of her sons at a hotel in a leafy suburb of Sandton. Grace was granted diplomatic immunity despite calls by a South African legal group, AfriForum, and protesters for her not to be allowed to leave the country. The development came as a surprise as some South Africans and some Zimbabweans were hoping to see her face the criminal justice system. The South African government's decision has a precedent. China gave Grace Mugabe diplomatic immunity in 2009 for allegedly assaulting British photographer Richard Jones. He alleges that she punched him while wearing a diamond-studded ring near a luxury hotel in Hong Kong. South Africa's International Relations Minister Maitenkoana Mashabane said in a statement that she had agonized about granting Mrs. Mugabe immunity, eventually concluded that it was warranted. Now, we're going to discuss this issue. You're at home. Welcome to joining the conversation. Tell us what you think. Our Twitter handle is @ANN7TV. You can use the hashtag Africa Tonight. For now, though, joining me in studio to discuss this further, political analyst Botsang Moela, and we'll also have AfriForum's legal representative via Skype. That's Willie Spies, and we're also having to get the DA Shadow Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Stevens Mukhalapa, on the phone line. We also had a word with Durko. They could not join us officially, but they did speak to us and managed to clarify a few of the issues that have been holding a lot of people back. We've had a lot of analysts taking a look at the situation and giving us their take, legal experts as well, looking at this and giving us their take. What I can tell you, what they confirmed to us a few minutes ago, is that the diplomatic immunity given to the First Lady of Zimbabwe, Grace Mugabe, stands. It is final. That is finished and clear. That is the end of the matter. It will not be pursued further. If anything, if the legal system in South Africa goes ahead and tries to, litigate, they will be in breach of the law. Of course, here we're talking of the Vienna Convention, 1961. But Tsang, I can see you're looking at me, obviously disagreeing with what I'm saying. You're welcome to join in the conversation. What is your reaction to this? I know we've been having this discussion for a long time now. Durka says, again, they cannot give us a formal statement because this is a case that is being counted in court. So, they're not wanting to say anything that will be used against them in a court of law until they know that there's NGOs that that have come up that are saying that they will be contesting this decision from Durko.
Okay, thanks. Good evening, Audrey, and good evening to the NN7 viewers. Well, I think Durko is being smart and very diplomatic, coincidentally about the matter. I am very surprised that they are refusing to release a statement because once you conduct a government business in a manner that is in line with the laws and rules of the country, in the lines and rules of the international treaties and conventions, in this instance, the Vienna 1961 Convention, you wouldn't hide or you wouldn't, suspect or have a problem in releasing information for public benefit. However, we must understand and accept that Durko is also aware that there is a possible judicial litigation from NGOs that is on the way, and therefore they wouldn't want to risk a situation whereby they compromise their case and so forth. That's one element. But I'm convinced where I'm sitting, and have been in the service for a period of over 10 years. I'm convinced that Durko wouldn't make a mistake in terms of applying diplomatic immunities and privileges which are accorded to diplomats. And a lot of people are misconstruing the fact what is a diplomat. We had to go, me and you, in the last few days to define what is a diplomat. A diplomat is not only a government employee to a foreign country who's carrying a diplomatic passport. Spouses, family members of heads of states are in that classification. In South Africa, we have the Chief Justice, Mogoeng. He is a carrier and travels with a diplomatic passport. So this is one element that I think Durko should have went public and explained to the public of the people of the Republic of South Africa to say, what do we mean by diplomats? What do we mean by diplomatic immunity? And I think in this instance, not knowing what Durko said to you in the official statement, I don't think they have done very well to bring the public into confidence of what is diplomatic immunity, who's entitled to it, and so forth.
Yeah.
And I haven't talked anything about the criminal law, the justice law, and the justice process of South Africa. I haven't said anything to that regard. I just explained how diplomatic immunity works, and I want to listen to fellow panelists who are on the line and hear what their opinion.
And speaking of fellow panelists, we have from AfriForum, Willie Spies. Willie, thank you for joining us this evening. Very good evening to you. Now, you are willing to, in fact, you will be contesting this decision from DIRCO of awarding the First Lady of Zimbabwe, Grace Mugabe, with diplomatic immunity. However, looking at the Vienna Convention of 1961, which is what DIRCO is quoting here, that immune is, well, let me just try and do this again. Article 37 and 31 of the Vienna Convention of 1961 says that Grace Mugabe is immune from criminal prosecution. How confident are you that she will be prosecuted and that perhaps this diplomatic immunity will be repealed?
Well, first of all, she is not immune automatically. Immunity, our laws. We are not certain that that was indeed the case, firstly. And we are also not certain that the granting of immunity in the specific circumstances, whether it was rational and whether it was justifiable given our constitutional requirements of good governance, accountability, equality before the law, and the right of all citizens to access to courts and to have their disputes settled before a court. So all these factors were probably not taken into consideration when the minister, in a hurry, 1 week after the actual incident, decided to apparently confer diplomatic immunity to Grace Mugabe. She did not enjoy diplomatic immunity. The Vienna Convention do not grant blanket diplomatic immunity. It does create for a process, and it does create for the process to be applied in a reasonable way. We do not think that that has happened, and based on that, we are preparing a review application to have the immunity satisfied.
Now, Botsang, given the scope of this immunity, the privileges afforded by the treaty, I mean, just looking at, of course, this is a treaty that was written in 1961. Do you think perhaps it needs to be, relooked? Because when you look at these diplomats, obviously there are people that are held to high standards, people that should be beyond reproach when it comes to certain issues, criminal prosecution, be it civil cases. Do you think it needs to be relooked, or do you think it is perfectly okay the way it is?
Well, Audrey, I don't think the Vienna Convention on diplomatic immunities and privileges is declaring diplomats or diplomatic passport carriers to be beyond reproach. I don't think it is. We have cases in the world whereby diplomatic passport carriers or diplomats have been prosecuted in the host country and or declared persona non gratas. Now, where I differ with Mr. Spies is, first, he said something that's very critical, to say the DIRCO has been hushed to make a decision. I don't think it was hushed. All of this process happened in 1 week, where the public outcry was saying the police and the justice system is delaying in prosecuting Grace Mugabe. People were saying it's delaying 3, 4, 5 days. Now he is saying it was hushed. I don't think it was hushed. But what we should look at is there is nothing wrong that is stopping the NGOs or the interest parties in this case to approach the courts in South Africa and challenge the decision of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. There's nothing stopping them. But the Vienna Convention, it may be 1961, but it is dependent on the member states, the signatories of the convention, to review that. Now, a lot of diplomats or diplomatic passport holders have committed a number of civil as well as criminal activities throughout the world between 1961 and 2017. Why would South African NGOs wake up today and say this 1961 convention is outdated and it needs review? As if the Vienna Convention has not been reviewed, as if there are no contributions from member states to the Vienna Convention. That is not true. There has been contributions, there has been reviews over years. It remains the 1961 Vienna Convention. But what is also important is a lot of people, I don't know what will the AfriForum and other interest bodies bring to court. A lot of people were saying Grace Mugabe was not traveling, was not here officially. They are missing the point. They are missing the mark. You don't have to be in official position or official activity to be granted diplomatic immunity. You should have been in that particular country within the diplomatic immunities concept. You should have traveled with a diplomatic passport. And Grace Mugabe, as the spouse of a sitting head of state, by automation and by the Vienna Convention, she qualifies for that. Now, I'm not saying her actions in South Africa to assault a model or a citizen or a noble citizen of this country is correct. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying we are now not talking about the criminal activity. We are talking about the Vienna Convention. Grace Mugabe is the first lady of Zimbabwe. She traveled to South Africa using her diplomatic passport. Even if she had used her private passport, which I doubt, she will still be entitled to diplomatic immunities because both Zimbabwe and South Africa are the signatories of the Vienna Convention. Therefore, they can exercise that right.
Yeah.
Exercising that right does not mean concerned parties cannot approach courts of law, whether in South Africa or in Zimbabwe, or internationally, to challenge that decision. But I think where I'm sitting, with the information that I'm having at hand, that the Department of International Relations and Cooperation has acted well within the Vienna Convention requirements to grant Mrs. Mugabe diplomatic immunity.
And I must say, just looking at the Vienna Convention, Willie, I do hope that you can hear us. I also went through, some articles that had been quoted by DIRCO itself when they came up with this decision to grant this diplomatic immunity. Of course, not to say what Mrs. Mugabe did was right, but it looks like they acted within the confinements of what the Vienna Convention says. Of course, there's the issue of remedial action. Should this case not go through, of course, you are contesting it as AfriForum. Article 9 of the treaty allows for a country to declare a diplomat as persona non grata. Are you looking at petitioning the government perhaps to look at that option, Willie?
No, we are not looking at that option because we do not trust the government to make the right decision. They've made wrong decisions on this. They've made wrong decisions on Omar al-Bashir, and they've made wrong decisions on many other issues. They tend to favor an approach of impunity. They tend to favor an approach of favoritism, and they favor an approach of inequality before the law and protecting people in power and making sure that ordinary citizens are not protected from the abuse of power by powerful people. So we do not trust government and we will not petition them. But what we will do is we will bring a review application in the High Court and we will explain in our papers that immunity the heads of state or their wives. And we will explain that our own legislation is also very clear that diplomatic immunity cannot apply when a person is either killed or injured, in this instance injured, and that the minister made a mistake in granting immunity in this regard, and the immunity should be set aside. So it's as simple as that. We will approach the courts, and we believe that the courts will listen to us.
Is it really as simple as that, Willie? When you say the government made a wrong decision, according to what do you base that that conclusion on? Because the government bases it on the Vienna Convention of 1961 and what it states. And of course, you speak of the legislation in South Africa. Where do you draw the line? I mean, what comes before what? What's that?
Yes.
Allow me to say this. The mistake that the opposition and interest groups like AfriForum and Willie are saying is that they think the Vienna Convention is not respecting or recognizing the domestic laws. And that is not true. This is what happens when South African government goes and enters into international treaties or agreements, whether it's bilateral or multilateral. The Vienna Convention is the multilateral agreement. For the South African government to become a signatory to a multilateral agreement like the Vienna Convention, there's a process in the country whereby the Department of International Relations and Cooperation will take that process to Parliament, to the National Assembly, and present it there. So it goes through the motions of internal domestic laws and processes, whereby the lawmakers of South Africa, which is the National Assembly, they will go through that motion. They will look at the proposal presented to them by the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, and the National Assembly taking into consideration the constitution of the country, the domestic laws of the country, and he mentioned the human rights and all those things. The National Assembly will take all those into consideration. Once we sign an international treaty, having have considered domestic laws, it means that international treaty is binding on us. I will not, Audrey, and citizens of South Africa sit here and compare this issue of Grace Mugabe to the issue of al-Bashir, the president. I will not do that.
Can we compare it to the Hong Kong incident, citing the previous incident where she was granted diplomatic immunity, citing, of course, once again, the Vienna Convention?
We can, because that's what Hong Kong did. We can. We are not saying her actions are correct. That's not what we are saying. We are saying Hong Kong, which is the bigger part of the Greater China at this moment, applied the 1961 Vienna Convention, immunities and privileges to Grace Mugabe. We have gone through the same process. We are signatories. We cannot come today and say, in South Africa, when you attack and assault a person, you must face criminal charges. While in South Africa, on the other hand, we are saying we are signatories of an international convention, international treaty that is subject to domestic laws. The Vienna Convention may have been signed in 1961, but the South African government, through its 1996 constitution as amended, we endorsed it. We became signatories. Right. Therefore, to assume that we ignored domestic laws and we only applied an international law, it is not correct.
Let's get Willie to respond to this. Willie, I do hope that you can still hear us.
Well, I think it's as simple as that. We cannot blame the Vienna Convention for wrong decisions that was made by ministers. The decision in this regard was wrong. The decision actually favorited impunity. And based on that, we believe that the decision will be able to be set aside by a court. We've undertaken that. We've started preparing our papers. We will issue our court papers, and we will present our case before the High Court in order to show that.
Very quickly, Willie, before I let you go, how soon do you think you'll be filing these papers?
Before the end of next week.
Right, well, we'll have to leave it there, Wosang. Thank you so much for joining us. Wosang Wheeler, the political analyst. I mean, we could have, discussed this further. We've run out of time. Of course, Willie speaks from AfriForum, saying that they are ready to file papers to the High Court to challenge the diplomatic immunity decision taken by DIRCO with regards to the First Lady of Zimbabwe, Grace Mugabe's case. Well, it's time for a very short break. When we come back, we find out whether Angola's ruling MPLA party is likely to win the August 23 vote. This and more after the break. Stay with us. A warm welcome back to Africa Tonight. Thank you for staying with us. We go to Congo now. The former Prime Minister Clement Mwamba has been reappointed as the Prime Minister 4 days after him and his cabinet resigned. Mwamba was reappointed on Monday by President Denis Sassou Nguesso. Mwamba, who had resigned last week, is now charged with forming a new government. Last week's resignations came after Sassou Nguesso said he wanted a new government to help alleviate economic woes that are caused by a steep drop in oil prices since 2014. Public debt has shot higher, raising questions over Congo's ability to meet coupon payments for its €363 million bond. Now here's an update on the landslide that happened in Sierra Leone. At least 8 people have lost their lives in the West African, well, no, this is Guinea, in the West African state of Guinea after a rubbish dump on the outskirts of the capital collapsed due to heavy rains. 5 bodies, including those of 2 children, were taken to a morgue in the capital, Conakry, where dozens injured people are recovering in hospital. The incident happened in Hamdulai, located in the district of Ratoma, after week-long heavy rains. The number of children used as human bombers by Boko Haram is 4 times more than in 2017 than it was a year ago. The alarming increase has been highlighted in a new report by the United Nations Children's Fund. Here's a report.
Children bear the brunt of the Boko Haram conflict. The Nigerian-based group is using young people as weapons. UNICEF reports a 4-fold increase in the number of children being used as human bombs. According to the organization, 83 children were forced to go on suicide missions in 2017. Among them were 55 girls under the age of 15 and an infant strapped to a girl. Most of the attacks were on so-called soft targets such as markets, schools, universities and displacement camps. This practice has also created suspicion and fear among the lucky ones who have been released, rescued or managed to escape Boko Haram. Many of those who have been freed from captivity face rejection when they return back to their communities. The Boko Haram insurgency, now in its 8th year, has claimed over 20,000 lives and forced more than 2 million to flee their homes. There are 1.7 million people displaced by the insurgency in the northeast, 85% of them in Borno State. Northeast Nigeria is one of 4 countries and regions facing the spectre of famine, with up to 450,000 children at risk of severe acute malnutrition. Bureau Report, ANN7.
Angola prepares for an election that will mark the end of President José Eduardo dos Santos' reign. Angolians cast their ballots on Wednesday in a vote that will see the ruling MPLA party retain power despite the country's economic crisis. Now, on the eve of the historic vote, outspoken anti-corruption campaigner Rafael Marques de Moraes dismisses the August 23 vote as already pre-rigged.
Angola gears up for a new era. For the first time in 38 years, the country will elect a new leader. Longtime ruler President José Eduardo dos Santos is quitting after nearly 4 decades in power. But he has laid the groundwork for a hand-picked successor. His party is set to retain power despite the country's economic crisis.
These elections are essentially just a process because we already know what the results are. And most of the population also knows what the results are. And the question is whether MPLA will try to understand how disaffected, how unhappy the population is, and give more space to the opposition. Because the results are pre-cooked, are predetermined before the elections take place.
On August 23rd, millions of people will head to the polls to elect a new leader. The election comes amid opposition complaints that the vote will not be free or fair. After nearly 40 years under the rule of President José Eduardo dos Santos, millions of Angolians are angry and frustrated. Many seem determined to use the elections to express their hunger for change, but analysts warn that not much will change under the new regime.
With this new president, what we expect is someone who will try to assert himself by the use of sheer force, not through diplomacy, not through changing what is wrong, but essentially by trying to be more arrogant. And that is what is going to get him into trouble very soon.
Angola's elite enjoyed a heady boom after the end of the civil war in 2002 as the country competed with Nigeria to be Africa's leading oil producer. GDP growth hit 20% and skyscrapers shot up in Luanda. But the collapse in oil prices has triggered a full-scale national economic crisis since 2014. Inflation hit a staggering 40% at the end of last year, when annual growth was less less than 1%. Bureau Report, ANN7.
Well, thank you for watching the program, and from myself, Audrey Chimwanda, and the Africa Tonight team, have a good night, but stay tuned to ANN7. More news and updates coming after this.